I'm just about to turn this over to Jared Barker with the Plano Fire Rescue Department, and he is going to show you some of this immediate responder training that we have. Jared Barker is an absolutely awesome individual. He's very well respected in the fire department. He's well respected in the police department as well. He helps out our SWAT team. He's one of our TAC medics, and he's going to teach you about controlling of life-threatening bleeding. Please welcome him to the stage.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everybody. Like you said, my name is Jared Barker. I've been with Plano Fire for a little over 12 years. I'm one of the guys in charge of the SWAT medic team. I've been doing that for a little over 10, and you'll get to meet some of those guys later on. So what we're going to do today, or this evening, is kind of go over a more informative type of bleeding control. We're going to show you this stuff, show you a few different techniques, some equipment, but also give you the opportunity to go out and show you a few locations that will give you a more hands-on stop the bleed type training. So understand, there's 1,500 people in here. It's really hard to show 1,500 people how to place on a tourniquet properly and us not be here till tomorrow morning. So we'll provide that towards the end. So on bleeding control, in 2013, after all these active shooter events occurred, we had a big group of medical professionals called the Hartford Consensus. They got together and they came up with two major things. You can see up here that no one should die from uncontrolled bleeding. And that's civilians, that's police, that's fire, that's anybody. And then also that all citizens should learn how to stop the bleeding. So who are the very first people on scene? The citizens. So if we arm you with the ability to apply very basic first aid and bleeding control, not only could you save your own life, but you save the lives of those around you. So bleeding, we all understand that bleeding and uncontrolled bleeding is the #1 cause of death in an active shooter situation. So just take that and kind of let that soak in. Uncontrolled bleeding, and we can fix that with a very, very simple device that will take you 30 to 45 seconds to put on. But also realize that it's going to take PD, it's going to take FD a while to get on scene. If you have a femoral bleed or a leg bleed, you have the ability to bleed out in 3 to 5 minutes. What was the national response time for PD units? 3 minutes. How close to that are we? So that's why we're here, going to empower you with information to do this first aid and do bleeding control. So you've already realized that your personal safety, that's #1. Your safety, the safety of your family, it always comes first. If you get injured, how many people are you able to help? None. So just realize that if you get injured, you're not going to be able to have the good ability to perform some of these bleeding controls you're about to learn. Also, once you you decide that you're in a safe area, you decide it's okay to go out and help other people or those people around you, go ahead and move those people that are not in a so safe environment, move them to a little safer environment. We talked about the run and the hide. Well, go ahead and take these people in a particular area and place them after you start doing some of this medical stuff. And then also, I understand not everybody carries medical gloves in their pocket. How many people have medical gloves in their pocket right now? Okay, so I saw one. We're going to have her stand up. There you go, right there. So realize that especially for yourself, a lot of this is for yourself. You can have the ability to stop your own bleeding. You have the ability to stop your family members. I don't need gloves to help my family out. Okay, so understand that. And this also comes into play when we start talking about different bleeding control kits and stuff like that. So locate the bleed. This is a very important part. To stop the bleeding, you got to find what? What's bleeding? What's going on? So locate the source of bleeding. All it is either examining yourself. If you've been shot, stabbed, or any sort of injury, you probably know where that location is. However, somebody else, you come across a family member or another citizen laying on the ground, kind of in your area, locate the bleeding. Find out where they're bleeding from. So that's just strictly, it's very, very simple. Locate where the bleeding is coming from. What are you looking for bleeding? It's the red stuff. So find the red stuff and start with that area. And then expose the wound. Expose the wound, again, very, very simple process. You're either tearing the clothes, if you do have scissors, knife, whatever else you decide to carry out with you, expose the wound. Just take that clothing. There's going to be a hole. There's going to be a tear on it anyway. Very simple. Pry that out so you can actually observe what type of wound you have. And then the third thing you're going to locate, and the most important, is life-threatening bleeding. Okay? There's going to be blood. Everybody's had a scratch on their arm or something like that. There's no need to put a tourniquet on a scratch. Okay? We're talking life-threatening bleeding. You're not going to die from a scratch. So we're going to show you a few different types of wounds, or go through a few different types of wounds and what you should look for. So if you look at that picture here, all he did, he located the bleeding. He saw the red stuff, cut, tore open the clothing, and decided whether it was life-threatening bleeding or not. So life-threatening bleeding. If you look right here at this guy, would everybody say that this is probably some life-threatening bleeding? It seems like the blood, I know it's a picture, but the blood is seems to be flowing very profusely, and there's a big puddle. Big puddles of blood, that's bad. So a few things, blood that is squirting. So every time you come across a major vessel in the legs, in the arms, something like that, every time your heart beats, that blood squirts. That's bad. We want to get on that pretty quick. Also, blood is pooling on the ground, just like this. If you're not sure what a lot of blood is, the adult male has 5 to 6 liters of blood. Everybody know what a liter of cola is? A Nalgene bottle. Fill that thing up, throw it on the ground. That's a liter. So once you start talking about that amount of fluid, that's when you really start to look at it and locate and figure out if that's life-threatening or not. Also, clothing that is very soaked in blood. So if you have a large vessel bleed, I'm talking femoral, carotid, all that good stuff, arms or legs, if you're wearing clothing and that clothing is still on, the blood will start to pool. So basically, my pants leg will start to turn red really fast. You got to jump on that. It's life-threatening bleeding. Also, partial or complete amputation of a limb. Limb meaning arms or legs. So if you have a full amputation, you get it, there's probably going to be a lot of blood. So let's get on that and apply a tourniquet, some wound dressing, and some direct pressure. And we'll talk about that later. But also, large amounts of blood. You have one of these, you got blood that's squirting. Maybe it stopped squirting by now. You have pools of blood, stuff like that. But you start talking to them. Of course, you're going to talk to the patient or the victim. If they are very confused, that's the fact for FD, they've lost a lot of blood. So now they're confused. Okay, so you got a lot of bleeding, and a confused victim realize that is life-threatening bleeding. So there's 3 steps to bleeding control. It's very, very simple. Is 1, apply direct pressure. Direct pressure is very simple. 2, apply dressing. And then last, step 3 is apply a tourniquet. So very, very simple, 3 steps, just like that. Initial thing, apply direct pressure, apply dressing, and we'll talk about what is dressing, and then also, lastly, apply a tourniquet. So 1, direct pressure. If you look at this picture right here, 1, the guy located the wound. He exposed the wound, realized that the red stuff, that's where I need to be. He is applying direct pressure. Very, very simple process. All you're taking is you're taking 2 hands and placing it on top of that wound, and you're applying continuous pressure. So take 2 hands, just like you're doing CPR. Same thing. You find that wound, you take your hands and place it on top of that wound, and you press down. Use 2 hands. You want to press down directly on the wound, continuous. Leave it there. Don't press down for a few seconds and then take your hands off, because once you take your hands off and it starts bleeding again, the process stops all over. What you're trying to do is to stop that bleeding will also help to form a clot. Press down hard and hold the pressure until the bleeding stops. Very, very simple. Main thing, 2 hands, just like you're doing CPR, over the wound, press down. Now, I'm talking, when I say press down, you're going to put your body weight into it. Okay, it's not just take 2 hands and throw it up there. That's not what we're doing. What you're trying to do is actually compress that vessel and stop the bleeding, okay? That is direct pressure. Very, very simple. The very first step you do is direct pressure. You're shot, you're injured, another victim right beside you, go ahead and start that direct pressure before you start worrying about anything else. Number 2 is dressing. How many people have dressing in their pockets right now? You got, oh, there we go. It's a lot more than medical gloves, so we got about 5 or 6. How many people is wearing a t-shirt? Would you consider that dressing? Again, we're not in a sterile medical environment. There's no ER. There's not a lot of doctors running around. What we're trying to do is save lives. okay? So cover the wound with dressing or a clean cloth. You use your idea of what a clean cloth is. Any large wound, and I'm talking fist size or bigger, any large wound, you're going to pack the wound. It's what we call wound packing. And all you're doing is before you apply that direct pressure, you're going to take that clean cloth, the dressing, and you're going to shove as much of that stuff into the wound as you can. It's going to hurt. Let them know it's going to hurt. They're probably yelling anyway. But go ahead and you're going to shove as much dressing or clean cloth into that wound as possible, and then take 2 hands, put direct pressure right over it, and hold it. That process is going to take 3 to 6 minutes, okay? It's not going to be a direct pressure, hold it for a few seconds, and I'm good to go. It's going to take 3 to 6 minutes for that clot to form and the bleeding to stop. So once you hold direct pressure, you hold that thing on there, check your iPhone, do whatever you got to do, Facebook update. Go ahead, hold that pressure 3 to 6 minutes before you start to check that and make sure the bleeding has stopped. So again, very large wounds, dressing, pack the wound. If it's a small wound, just go ahead and put that dressing over top of it and apply direct pressure. So dressing, very important here. The dressing is only placed for large wound packing type things, arms, the legs, so all 4 extremities, neck area, and the groin area. You never place any dressing from the waistline to the bottom of the neck. You never place anything in that area. Does everybody understand? So that, no wound packing. Leave it alone. We'll talk about a little bit of seal later on. So never place inside the chest, the stomach, or the back area. So it's red for a reason. Never. And step 3, tourniquets. How many people have ever applied a tourniquet in their lifetime? Practice, real life, anything like that. How many people used to think that tourniquets were the worst thing ever? It used to be a myth that once you got a tourniquet placed on you, bad things happen after that. A lot of military research, all this information that's coming here is coming from the Department of Defense, from our guys overseas. So all this stuff has been researched. So we're providing you actual factual research data, okay? So tourniquets are a good thing. Tourniquets stop the bleeding. There's nothing wrong with applying a tourniquet. Just because you have a tourniquet on, the old mentality of saw bones, put a tourniquet on, I'm going to get my arm chopped off, that is not happening. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We teach one method of applying the tourniquets. Ride it high. Every time, no matter where the wound is located, for civilians, ride that thing high. So if I have an arm wound anywhere on this right here, I'm going to take that thing and go all the way up into my armpit as far as I can and put the tourniquet on, both arms. Same thing with the leg wound. No matter where I'm injured at the leg, go ahead and take that tourniquet and ride it as high up as you can get it on either leg. So just remember that term, very important, ride it high. If you look, the higher you get up, bigger muscle mass, larger part of the vessel, and a larger bone. So a lot easier to compress and shut that bleeding off. So no matter how many times I've shot in this arm, or how many times I've been stabbed, or how many injuries I have, ride that tourniquet high and it takes care of all of it. So remember that, ride it high. Tourniquets, arm and legs only. Extremities, that's the only place you apply tourniquets. Nothing around the neck, nowhere else. No matter, maybe in-laws, take your pick, nothing around the neck, arms only, okay? Place the tourniquet as high on the arm or leg. Again, what do we call that? Ride it high. And if the bleeding doesn't stop with the one tourniquet, a lot of jacked up guys, big legs, big arms, stuff like that, it may take 2 tourniquets. So if you run a tourniquet up, one, you're going to check pockets real quick, just make sure they have the big iPhone, the computer, Copenhagen, all that good stuff that guys carry. Make sure that's all out of the way. Run that stuff, put your tourniquet on, cinch it down as tight as you can, and if the bleeding has not stopped completely, go ahead and run another tourniquet up and ride it right below the other one. So 2 tourniquets, that's okay. So again, bleeding doesn't stop with 1 tourniquet, let's go to 2. So you're going to watch 2 videos real quick. That is about 1.5 minutes each. One is applying an arm tourniquet, and then 2 is applying a tourniquet to the leg. After that, we'll have some other SWAT medics come out, and we're actually going to demonstrate for you how easy, how simple, and how it's going to take you about 30 seconds to put on a tourniquet. So this is the arm portion.
Welcome to the CAT Tourniquet video tutorial, one-handed application to upper extremity. Insert the wounded limb through the loop formed by the band. Apply tourniquet proximal to the bleeding site. Pull the band tight and securely fasten the band back on itself. Adhere the band around the limb. Do not adhere past the rod clip. Twist the rod until bright red bleeding has stopped and the distal pulse is eliminated. Place the rod inside the clip, locking it in place. Check for bleeding and absence of distal pulse. Adhere the band over the rod, inside the clip, and fully around the limb. Secure the rod and band with the strap. Prepare the patient for transport and reassess. For more information about the CAT Tourniquet or any NAR products, please visit www.narescue.com or call 888-689-6277.
Okay, so very simple process. So same thing here on the leg. You're going to see that the tourniquet can be applied 30-45 seconds. Very easy.
Welcome to the CAT Tourniquet video tutorial, application to lower extremity. Route the band around the limb and pass the red tip through the inside slit of the buckle. Pull the band tight. Apply tourniquet proximal to the bleeding site. Pass the red tip through the outside slit of the buckle. The friction buckle will lock the band in place. Pull the band very tight and securely fasten the band back on itself. When the band is pulled tight, no more than 3 fingers will fit between the band and the limb. Twist the rod until bright red bleeding has stopped and the distal pulse is eliminated. Place the rod inside the clip, locking it in place. Check for bleeding and absence of distal pulse. If bleeding is not controlled, consider additional tightening of the tourniquet or the use of a second tourniquet, side by side and proximal to the first, to eliminate the distal pulse. Secure the rod inside the clip with the strap. Prepare the patient for transport and reassess. Record the time of application.
Okay, so we understand that a very simple process to put on a tourniquet. So what we'll do, we have some of the SWAT medics coming out, and I introduce them when they get out here. So it'll be staged periodically. There's going to be 2 of us on the stage. There's going to be 4 guys out in the audience. We're going to show you how easy and how quick it is to put on a tourniquet. We're not going to race. These guys can put these tourniquets on in 15 to 20 seconds. What we're going to show you is how simple and walk you step by step on how to do it. So we don't recommend any certain tourniquet. We'll go into that later. This just happens to be a CAT tourniquet. This is what we use as SWAT medics on the SWAT team. And all of Plano Fire, we use CAT tourniquets. This is what we use. We're not going to recommend one or the other right now. So easy. What we're going to show you is how to place it over an arm wound. So one, you got to identify that I got shot in the arm. So if I got shot in the left arm, one, I've located the wound. I figured out no matter where it's at, I'm going to ride that tourniquet where? Ride the tourniquet high. Step 1, you're going to wrap the tourniquet around the injured area. So I know that I'm going to take this tourniquet and put it over my left arm. Very simple. Run the strap through the buckle if you had already done it. It's an arm, so I already got it in loop, so I've covered that portion. Pull the free end as tight as you can. So all you're doing is taking it and tying this and tightening it as much as you can get it around the arm. Notice where my windlass or the rod is at. It's on the outside part of my arm. You're gonna pull as much stress and tension and then run the Velcro around. Next step, you're gonna take this other, what I talked about, the windlass, the rod, and you're gonna turn it until the bleeding stops. If you got this thing on tight, you're lucky to get 2 to 3 turns. Take the rod, you're going to put it in the rod holder, which are these 2 portions right here. And you're going to take this windlass strap, place it over the windlass or the rod. And the last step, Note the time. This comes into the point when we take you to the hospital, FD finally gets on scene, realize you got a tourniquet. The time is very, very important for the guys once we get you to the hospital. So that is an arm. Now we're going to show you a leg. So with the leg, a little bit different from the arm. You're going to start out, normally the tourniquet is loaded and comes out of the package somewhat like this. When I have a leg wound, I'm going to go ahead and open it up, take it out of the package. I'm going to go ahead and take this out of the buckle. You would take it, place the tourniquet around your leg, go ahead and run that strap through the buckle. Remember, what am I doing with this tourniquet? Where am I placing it? Riding it high. Same thing, the rod is going to be on the outside part of my thigh. You're going to take as much tension as you can and Velcro it back. Take the windlass rod, turn it as many times as you can get. If you can get 2, you're doing good. You would turn that windlass rod until what stops? Till the bleeding, till the red stuff stops coming out, till the bleeding stops. And you're going to take your windlass strap one more time, go over the rod, and you're going to note the time. Everybody got it? Really, very simple. These guys are trained to a standard. All PDs trained to a certain standard, including FD, so there should be no reason. You get these things out a few times. 45 seconds is very, very attainable. And you'll know if you have it on properly because 1, the bleeding stops, so you're alive, that's a good thing. But 2, also your pulse for your arm or your foot, pedal pulse, it won't be there, so that's a good thing. So tourniquet, once you put that tourniquet on, once you apply it, leave it alone. Okay, medical professionals, we can come in and do a few other things, but once you apply that tourniquet, leave it there. And just for the defunk a little bit of myths here, you can have that tourniquet on for a little over 2 hours before there's any damage done to muscle or nerves. That's the way these new tourniquets are designed. So don't feel like if you put a tourniquet on, I'm going to the doctor, no sawbones is going to cut off my arm, my leg. That's not the way it happens. Okay, so realize you have 2 hours before you have any sort of muscular or nerve damage. So one thing, let's talk about improvised tourniquets. 1, how many people have a tourniquet in their pocket right now? Couple. I'd say more than dressing. Okay, so we're doing good. Definitely more than medical gloves. Well, think about an improvised tourniquet. Boy Scouts, there's a lot of different first aid classes out there and stuff like that. Realize you can make an improvised tourniquet. Do they work as well as a cat tourniquet? No. Most improvised tourniquets will not provide the pressure and everything as a medically placed tourniquet. However, just realize you have the ability to use the improvised. This is old school. This came from like a 1900s manual there. So this guy found him some cloth and a bayonet and made him a tourniquet. It looks like it's working, but just realize when you make an improvised tourniquet, try to make that thing at least 2 inches in width. That cuts down on a bunch of nerve and muscle damage. There's a lot of things out there. If you realize, if you search tourniquet online, how many different items are going to come up. Realize 1.5 to 2 inches. It spreads out the nerve and muscular damage, so you're doing. And then you're going to need a rod or a stick. How many's got a pen in their pocket? How many's got a pocket knife? Stuff like that. Anything to be used as a rod or stick to put tension on that tourniquet, it's good to go. So let's talk about you've done your job. 1, you've located the bleed, you applied direct pressure, you put dressing, you applied a tourniquet. So the bleeding stopped. You're good to go. So find somebody, do your high five thing, update the Facebook. But 2, don't realize you can do more than one person. Okay, you can help more people out. So if it comes to the fact where you're helping people out and you've helped one, move on to the next. But also before you leave that person, if they're conscious, sit them up. Allow them to assume any position that helps them breathe. Okay, let them pick that. Don't force them in a position that I was told in the Boy Scouts, I got to lay you down. It says that on page 63 of the manual. Their body is very resilient and they'll find out how to breathe on their own. If they're unconscious, we will lay them in the recovery position. This is for unconscious people only. You stop the bleeding, they're unconscious, lay them on their left side. Take their left leg and their left arm straight out. Just like the picture, left arm, left side, left leg. Put that straight out, take the right hand, put it under their chin, and then cross their feet. And that person will stay in that position until medical personnel get to them. It keeps the neutral airway, keeps that airway open. If there's any bleeding, any vomit or anything like that, keeps that going where it's supposed to go. And you just help that person and you move on to help somebody else. That's called the recovery position for unconscious people. Conscious people, they'll figure out how to breathe on their own, so leave them alone. Let's talk bleeding control kits real quick. We're not selling anything, we're not recommending certain things, but I'm going to tell you a bleeding control kit in general. So a basic kit that everybody carries with them, maybe it's in your car, maybe you went hunting, maybe it's at the pretty much anywhere you want it, is a kit good for 1 or 2 person, okay? And then you got the commercial bleeding control kits, which is something that will be placed in large businesses and stuff like that where they treat approximately 8 to 10. Again, how many people carried medical gloves, gauze, tourniquets, all that stuff? That's where these bleeding control kits come in. So bleeding control kit, basic, very, very basic kit, treats 1 to 2 people. And this is what we recommend in the kit, and this is recommended by other standards in the nation, not just our own, but 2 tourniquets, 2 gauze, 1 compressing bandage, 1 pair of gloves for you that don't have medical gloves, and then a marker. Why do you need the marker? To note the time. That's very important when they get to the hospital. Again, we don't advocate any certain stuff. We don't provide a particular brand. What we do is say this, the CAT, the soft T wide, are 2 approved tourniquets. These tourniquets are approved by the Department of Defense, by the company of TCCC. These items have been used in Afghanistan, Iraq, overseas. They've done a lot of research and spent a lot of money to figure out what works. Again, you go online, you can find all sorts of items out there. Anybody can invent a tourniquet. That doesn't mean it works. So these are just some of the things that has been passed on. Look there at the end, improvised tourniquet, and on the gauze side of it, you're talking clean cloth, T-shirt. Where else you want to go with that? And then also we talk about compressing bandage, the gloves, make sure they're medical type gloves, and then 1 marker. And we have some examples of this later on after the class. A few extra things that the kits can have in it is a chest seals. Chest seals are good because we talked about bleeding on the arms and legs. Well, what happens if something happens here in the truncal area? Basically this area where I told you never put anything. That's where the chest seal comes into play. You find a hole, you take a big sticker and stick it over the hole. That's all you have to do. That person needs to get to surgery very quick. So that's all as a citizen you can do for them right there. Also litters, this comes a business thing. How you gonna carry people? You got large areas, something like that. Just something for large businesses and commercial opportunities to think about. And then trauma shears, we talk about locating the bleed, exposing the wound. Rip that clothes open, but it's a lot easier if you got trauma shears. Kit locations, very important, especially for businesses. How many knows where their AED locations are at? Would it make sense for large business to put their trauma bleeding control kit right next to the AED? So that's something to go back to your management and talk about it. Put it in a visible area where the public can access it, but also next to AED is very good. That's kind of becoming part of the national standard. A lot of groups are going that way because AED is already there. So let's move on with that. So here we'll talk about, this is just information. I gave you information. Nobody here put a tourniquet on. These are 2 places right off the bat, Medical City of Plano and Presbyterian Plano, Texas Health Presbyterian Hospital of Plano. Both of these have Stop the Bleed programs. I did not teach a Stop the Bleed program tonight. I just talked to you about bleeding control. Stop the Bleed will get you hands-on with applying direct pressure, dressing, and applying tourniquets. So these are 2 local assets, including Plano Fire Rescue. In February 2018, we'll be ready to do our own bleeding control. So you'll see an email address here for Captain Peggy Harold. It's bleedingcontrol@plano.gov. You'll see it up here in a little bit. You want some actually hands-on training, contact these 2 people. I believe they actually have some information in the back there, but also contact Plano Fire and we'll get you hooked up with a little bit more hands-on training. And that's all I have for y'all tonight. Appreciate it.